In the previous video, I showed you how to connect to the database. In this video, I will show you how to create elements, how to insert rows in the database. To do that, let's move to VS Code and we're going to create a new file. Call it create.php. In this file, we're going to connect to the database. Therefore, we're going to require once. And we have previously created the db.php file that allows us to connect to the database. Therefore, I'm going to require that file. The link to that video is in the description. Since we're going to create elements in the database, you always have to keep in mind that this is going to be an interaction with that database. So we need to put it inside a try catch. Always do that. The catch will get a PDO exception, and we're going to put that inside a variable that we call EX. We're going to echo EX if something goes wrong. Once we have the create, since we're going to insert data in the database, we're going to get this via post. That's the usual thing. Users will post via form, and therefore we have to grab the values from post. To do that, we're going to get a name from post, and this is going to be passed via the variable call name. Let's duplicate these lines, and we will also pass the email. That will happen inside the email variable, and we will also get a password, and that will come inside the password variable. When we created the database, we also had an ID, but the ID for the user is not necessary because that is given to us from the database. Let's test this quickly. I'm going to echo, and I'm going to echo the variable name. Then I'm going to echo the variable email and the variable password. Save it. Let's move to Postman, and in Postman we're going to point to the file that we just created. It's called create.php. We test it, and then you can see that we have undefined variable name and undefined variable email and so on. And that's happening because we need to post, and we're going to create a form. Pretend this is a form from HTML. So we'll go to body, form data, and over here, these input fields are the exact same thing as the input fields that you will have in an HTML form. We set the name to be, let's do the letter C. We don't have that element in the database. We set the email to be @C, and then we will set the password to be passC. We're going to send the request, and then we see that we get the name C, the email is @C, and the password is passC. So this has been successfully tested, and now we can continue injecting the data, inserting the data in that users table. To do that, we need to, let me just indent this correctly. We need to create a query. So we're going to create a query, and this query is going to be pointing to the DB variable that we created in the previous video. This DB variable is the one that we're using right there. So this DB is going to be preparing for us a statement. So we say that we want to prepare, and we want to insert something inside that table. Insert into users. Users is the table name, and we want to insert the values. Several values. I'm going to make a mistake here now so you can see how all this works. We're going to insert the name, and we're going to put this as a placeholder. That means that this variable that's highlighted, it is going to be replaced by some value in the near future. We also have a placeholder for the email, the exact same thing. This is a placeholder, it will be replaced, and we need a placeholder for the password. The exact same thing as before. Now we say that the query is going to bind value, and this is just a function that allows us to replace the placeholder with a real value. So I'm going to bind the value in this case, the placeholder that I call column name, and that is going to be replaced with what I have in the variable called name. I duplicate this line. Now I will say that this placeholder called email is going to be replaced with the variable email. And then I do the exact same thing with any other fields that we have. In this case, the placeholder password is going to be replaced with the variable that we got from post called password. Once we have done this, we have to execute the query. So we say query, and then we just tell it to run execute. Now you don't need to do an if-else statement to check if this execute command was running correctly, because if something goes wrong, if you have the incorrect statement here, the system will automatically take you to the catch. And that's the nice thing about using this exception mode. So we do not need to do try catches. Let me test this. We need to go and point to the create file in Postman, and you're going to see that you get the exception. The exception says that the value list does not match the column list. Don't panic about it. We have in the database 4 columns: the ID, the name, the email, and the password. But in this statement, we are not inserting the ID. To solve that, the only thing you need to do is put a null, because this null just tells the database to handle the ID automatically. And since the ID is a serial data type, the database will know how to assign an ID to it. You could also do something else. Let's just first test this. So now you can see that everything went fine. We should have that element inserted in the database. If I show you the database here, we browse, you can see that we have the element C created. But you can also do it in a different way. If you want to be really picky about placeholders, you can create a placeholder for the ID, and now you can just duplicate this line, and then you say that the ID is going to be null. Save it, and now we're going to test it from Postman. I'm going to create a new element. It's going to be D, at D, and the path is going to be pass D. We send the data. We don't have any output just yet. And when we browse, we get the element D. So sometimes I like to use this technique that I have these placeholders for every single value in the database. Now that we have executed, we would like to show you the most important thing, show the user. So what is important is to know this ID, the ID that was given to this new row. It has to be known by the browser, so you can actually display it in a nice form, or you can pass this via an API. And to do that, I will just show you how we get that variable. We're going to echo, and we're going to echo the user ID. This ID comes from the database, and you heard me saying database, so therefore you say from the database, point to the last insert ID. We save it, and now we're going to test via Postman. Now we have the user with ID 5, which happens to be also DDD. I didn't change the values there. And you can see here that the ID is actually ID 5. If I do a new test with a new ID, let's do that. Let's do the E, and E for this element here. We send the request, the ID is 6, we check the database, and we see that the ID is actually 6. Before I actually continue doing this, let me just go back to this code. Quick recap. We have created the user, and we got the last inserted ID. The DB always refers to the database. In the next video, I will show you how we can read data from the users table.